Mineralys Therapeutics,
Yeah.
ticker symbols MLYS.
Yeah, I mean, that right there is the sound of the clock ticking on really one of the most fascinating standoffs in the biotech sector right now.
Welcome back to another deep dive. Today we are opening up a dossier built from a highly specific stack of sources. We are synthesizing recent SEC 10Q filings, Phase 3 clinical readouts from the European Society of Hypertension Conference, and these granular 13F institutional ownership databases.
Right, getting into the really deep data.
Exactly. We are looking at Mineralys Therapeutics, operating the high blood pressure and cardiometabolic space.
Yeah.
And for those of you tracking this sector, you know that hypertension isn't just a mature, sleepy pillar of cardiovascular medicine anymore.
Oh, not at all. Under the hood, this specific area has suddenly become the epicenter of this massive multi-billion-dollar acquisition war.
It really is. So our objective for this deep dive is to analyze the structural mechanics of Mineralys' lead asset, dissect the architecture of their executive syndicate, and interpret the highly aggressive financial and legal maneuvers buried in their recent filings. Because, I mean, it all points to an imminent corporate exit.
Yeah, and the broader context here is just critical for you to understand. When you look at the landscape of hypertension therapeutics over the last 2 decades, you essentially see a graveyard of incrementalism.
Right, like beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, diuretics.
Exactly. And look, they altered the trajectory of human longevity, undeniably. But for this massive, highly vulnerable subset of patients suffering from treatment-resistant hypertension, the pharmaceutical industry basically hit a wall.
The mechanisms were fully optimized.
Yeah, the pipeline for novel targets just went completely dry for 20 years. The standard of care devolved into stacking 3, 4, or 5 of these legacy mechanisms on top of each other, which brings compounding toxicities and diminishing returns.
Which, physiologically, is a nightmare scenario. Untreated resistant hypertension isn't just a number on a cuff. It is the slow-motion mechanical destruction of the microvasculature. It shreds the delicate filtration networks in the kidneys, thickens the ventricular walls of the heart, and fundamentally degrades your entire cardiovascular system.
It's devastating.
So you have this massive total addressable market, a desperate clinical void, and then, after 2 decades of stagnation, the tectonic plates suddenly shift.
And that paradigm broke open because of AstraZeneca. They secured FDA approval for Baxdrostat, which completely validates an entirely new therapeutic frontier, the ASI class, Aldosterone Synthase Inhibitors.
Right. And to really grasp the magnitude of that approval, you have to look at the pharmacology of the RAS pathway. For decades, the field knew that aldosterone was the primary culprit in resistant hypertension. It's the hormone commanding the kidneys to fiercely retain sodium and water.
Which aggressively drives up blood volume.
Right. And historically, the best the industry could do was deploy drugs like spironolactone to try and block the receptor that aldosterone binds to. But an ASI goes straight to the molecular source. It targets the CYP11B2 enzyme, which is the biological factory making aldosterone. You aren't just deploying sandbags downstream, you are shutting off the hydroelectric dam at its source.
Yeah, and the reason this took 20 years to figure out is a problem of enzymatic homology. The enzyme that produces aldosterone is structurally almost identical to the one that produces cortisol.
And cortisol is essential. You cannot survive without it.
Precisely. Previous attempts to inhibit aldosterone accidentally blocked cortisol too, leading to disastrous safety profiles. The breakthrough of the ASI class is achieving absolute selectivity. AstraZeneca proved to the FDA that this highly selective mechanism is not only viable, but safe at a population scale.
Okay, but let me push back here intellectually. If AstraZeneca just successfully navigated that brutal regulatory gauntlet, proved the selectivity, and fundamentally won the race to be first in class, the immediate assumption is that they take the entire board. If AstraZeneca already won, why is Mineralys valuable?
That is the pivotal question. In biotech M&A, the second mover in a newly validated high-conviction class is often the most lucrative asset on the market. Mineralys is sitting on Lorundrostat, their own late-stage ASI.
Ah, because AstraZeneca absorbed all the heavy artillery from the FDA.
Exactly. Because AstraZeneca proved the foundational safety of the ASI mechanism, Mineralys' regulatory risk profile essentially evaporates. The market no longer views Lorundrostat as the highly speculative biological experiment. It is a deeply de-risked, projected blockbuster with a firm December 2026 FDA decision date.
Wow. So that reduction in risk completely alters the valuation matrix for the megapharmas observing from the sidelines. You have entities like Novartis, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, But the logical question is, why wouldn't they just activate their internal R&D engines and synthesize their own selective ASI? They certainly have the expertise.
They do, but they are trapped by an immovable structural constraint, which is the clinical development timeline.
Right, because you can deploy unlimited capital, but you cannot compress biological time. You have to move through molecule discovery, animal toxicity models, phase 1 safety, phase 2 dose ranging, and then these massive multi-year phase 3 trials.
Which gives you a hard floor of 5 to 8 years minimum. And while you are grinding through phase 2 in 2030, AstraZeneca is out there monopolizing a completely uncontested commercial landscape. They are locking in formulary access and cementing physician prescribing habits.
So the time constraint is everything.
It is. The peak sales projections for the ASI class are currently hovering around the $10 billion mark annually. Mega Pharma cannot afford to let AstraZeneca monopolize this new area, so it has an incentive to acquire it.
Right, so we are talking about acquisitions driven by existential corporate strategy, not just the isolated value of the asset. It's a strategic necessity just to survive in this space.
In biotech banking circles, it's classified as a Type B strategic necessity transaction. You are buying the only remaining ticket into the stadium. There are actually multiple examples of such acquisitions motivated by competitive strategy.
Like what? Give me some historical precedent.
Well, look at Roche. They paid $3.1 billion for Carmot Therapeutics just to enter the GLP-1 weight loss stadium. Carmot's lead asset was still years away from commercialization, but Roche paid that premium purely for a beachhead. They had to physically exist in the GLP-1 arena.
Because otherwise their metabolic division is completely sidelined.
Exactly. We saw the exact same dynamic in oncology when Gilead Sciences dropped $21 billion to acquire Immunomedics for Trodelvy, just to enter the ADC cancer space immediately. But the most direct parallel is AstraZeneca's own pathway into the ASI space.
Oh, right. Because they didn't organically discover Baxdrostat in their own labs.
No, they executed a $1.8 billion buyout of Syncor Pharma to acquire the molecule that became Baxdrostat. They bought the asset to skip the discovery phase. And now, Mineralys is the absolute only independent, late-stage ASI ticket left globally.
The scarcity premium there is immense, but simply being the last independent asset doesn't guarantee a premium buyout from a Novartis. For a mega pharma to deploy billions, they need unequivocal certainty that Lorundrostat can actually compete with AstraZeneca's approved drug. What makes it competitive clinically?
That inflection point occurred at the ESH 2026 medical meeting. They unpacked the phase 3 Launch-HTN trial data. And they didn't just test this on standard, uncomplicated hypertension.
Right, they went for the hardest population.
Exactly. They tested patients with both hypertension and chronic kidney disease, or CKD. 71% of those individuals were already on 3 or more medications, and their disease was still accelerating.
Because in CKD, the structural damage impairs the kidney's ability to filter sodium, which drives up fluid volume and blood pressure. Then that elevated blood pressure exerts catastrophic hydrostatic force right back onto the kidneys, causing them to scar and fail even faster. It's a brutal cycle. But what was the data? I saw the blood pressure reduction, but the secondary endpoints were what caught my eye.
The renal preservation data was staggering. They demonstrated a 52.2% reduction in kidney damage.
Wait, really? 52.2%? Because when you look at the current standard of care for kidney protection, like the SGLT2 inhibitors, their absolute peak efficacy usually hovers around a 30 to 40% reduction in damage markers.
Exactly. Mineralys completely shattered that ceiling. They tracked the UACR, the urine albumin to creatinine ratio, which quantifies the structural leakage of proteins from damaged kidneys. A 52% reduction signifies a profound, rapid halting of physical tissue destruction.
That is massive. But the historical paradox here is safety. When you drastically alter sodium excretion and compromise kidneys, you inevitably alter potassium retention. The cardinal fear is hyperkalemia, dangerously elevated serum potassium levels. If it spikes too high, it triggers fatal arrhythmias. What was the safety profile?
Pristine. In the Launch-HTN trial, Lorundrostat achieved that unprecedented reduction with a confirmed high potassium risk rate of just 2.4%.
2.4%. In an advanced CKD population prone to potassium retention. That is undeniably clean safety.
It is an elite data package, but how they position that data is just as important. They didn't bury it in a standard poster presentation. Mineralys deployed Dr. Lifford Vogt, a preeminent nephrology professor, at the ESH hotline session 2.
Oh, wow. The optics of that are brilliant. By placing a globally recognized kidney specialist on the main stage, they signaled that Lorundrostat is a practice-changing cardiorenal platform, not just a blood pressure pill. So, naturally, I have to pivot to the architects behind this. Who built this company?
The syndicate is an all-star team built to sell. You have venture builder BT Slingsby, who licensed the foundational molecule for just $1 million upfront.
Unbelievable asymmetric risk to reward.
Then they installed Glenn Splendorio as chairman. He previously sold Iveric Bio for a multi-billion-dollar premium. The CEO is John Congleton, a commercial launch veteran, and the loudest signal is their CFO, Adam Levy.
Adam Levy, right. I looked into him. He structured over $30 billion in M&A deals as an investment banker. You do not hire him for slow organic growth.
No, you hire him to structure a tax-optimized, massive corporate exit. The entire entity was reverse-engineered from the point of sale. Phase 3 efficacy, AstraZeneca's validation, clean safety, top-tier endorsements, all packaged into one neat target.
So for you listening, synthesize this. This entire entity was engineered for an exit from day one. But theory doesn't pay out. We need tangible, real-time SEC signals that an acquisition is imminent.
The language shifts in their SEC 10Q filings are revealing. In Q3 of 2025, CEO John Congleton said, "We have not had a for sale sign in front of this company."
A completely categorical denial.
Yeah.
But then in Q1 of 2026, after that Launch-HTN data dropped, the language completely shifted.
Yeah.
He said they were evaluating opportunities, but he was, quote, not in a position to provide color.
And that phrase is a massive red flag. Under a strict non-disclosure agreement during active due diligence, executives are legally paralyzed. If there was no deal, you simply repeat the Q3 denial. But the smoking gun is actually in the filings themselves. The general and administrative expenses violently spiked from $9.7 million to $21 million in a single quarter.
A 116% jump in administrative burn rate for a company that isn't actively building massive manufacturing facilities. And the crucial detail in the footnotes, $7.9 million of that increase was explicitly categorized as professional fees, an $8 million signal.
Yes. In late-stage biotech, a sudden injection of capital into professional fees dictates one thing. Elite investment bankers and M&A legal counsel are actively structuring a deal. They deploy armies of associates to audit patents, prepare antitrust filings, and draft merger agreements. You don't burn $8 million on lawyers in 3 months for routine corporate governance.
So the legal mobilization is undeniable. But this brings up the most logical question for our listeners. If the data, the language, and the legal fees all point to M&A, why is the stock price flat? When the FDA accepted their new drug application, the stock moved a microscopic 0.7%.
It looks like apathy, but it is actually algorithmic accumulation. Institutional mega funds utilize VWAP algorithms, volume-weighted average price, to route block trades quietly. They supply liquidity into any retail buying pressure, effectively capping the share price and suppressing volatility while smart money quietly buys.
So they intentionally mask their footprints. But the one statistic that really stands out is the institutional ownership exceeding 110%.
Yeah.
How does that even happen?
It's an anomaly of short-selling mechanics. When a hedge fund borrows shares from a pension fund to short, and sells them, the buyer registers as an owner, but the original pension fund still records a synthetic long position. It causes double counting of the lent shares. But more importantly, a 110% metric signals extreme structural tightness. The tradable float is completely locked up. And while total institutional holders dropped by 32%, the high conviction funds expanded their allocations by 32%.
So the weak hands folded, and the heavyweight funds cornered the float. That means when a mega pharma makes a tender offer, retail resistance will be completely non-existent.
Zero friction. The funds demand the exit, the syndicate engineered the company for the exit, and the mega pharma requires the underlying asset.
It is a perfect alignment. So to perfectly summarize this core thesis for you listening, we're looking at superior kidney protection, a newly validated $10 billion market, and the absolute necessity of an entry ticket for mega pharmas trapped behind a massive R&D time barrier. You combine that with exploding legal fees and an institutional cornering of the stock ahead of the December PDUFA date.
Mineralys is the final rapid entry gateway into the cardiometabolic era. The clock is ticking.
A tactical showdown in the cardiovascular space. Thank you for the analysis. And for you listening, I want you to ponder something. What happens to the broader pharmaceutical ecosystem when the only remaining independent asset in a $10 billion market is finally taken off the board? Will being boxed out of this specific indication ignite an entirely new wave of defensive acquisitions in adjacent spaces? Keep that in mind as you watch the market.